Depending on your perspective, it may come as a surprise to hear that higher education is thought to be a market or a business opportunity, given that higher education is a public enterprise which has public good outcomes. For an individual, education is inherently worthwhile with immense personal value, leading to personal self-development and fulfillment, a benefit to oneself. And then at a societal level, countries need educated citizens that can contribute to society in numerous fields, and those entering higher education are the future professionals servicing communities. Governments who invest in public higher education do so to achieve outcomes that contribute to the development of human capital, an educated labour force, which will help societies and countries develop. On the other hand, it may come as a surprise to some to even think that higher education is not a market. After all, students are often referred to as customers and consumers because they pay for a degree which enables them to get a job. It is an investment in oneself. A university degree is a private good because it benefits an individual in a number of ways, economically through higher salaries, or as a way of signalling one's capability to potential employers, as well as socially signalling a person's calibre or credentials. In market terms, a private good is rivalrous and excludable and can be bought and sold. And so universities sell and market their specific services and brands to appeal to parents and potential students based on the perceived value they offer. Our intention is to explore what we mean when we talk about marketisation in higher education. We consider the market and its associated term of marketisation as an umbrella term incorporating a range of concepts familiar to the corporate world, such as privatisation, commercialisation, commodification, corporatisation, and financialisation. All of these terms have quite specific meanings, but together they point to an increasing reality that suggests that forms of marketisation are very much part of the global higher education landscape. Of course, the nature and extent of marketisation varies regionally and also affects different types of universities in different ways. So how did we get to a situation where the market and market forces can be seen as playing a part in higher education? The past few decades have seen events that have shaped ways in which higher education is increasingly looking and acting like a market. Worldwide austerity and periods of financial crises have led to government policies which have resulted in decreasing amounts of public funding for universities. In many jurisdictions, especially in the United States, the United Kingdom and Australia, policy developments have been influenced by an ideology that supports the privatisation of public services, further reducing government spending on higher education. Simultaneously, higher education globally has been subject to massification, which means an increasing demand for higher education. More and more people, especially in developing countries, are wanting to enter higher education. Over time, various responses to these forces have emerged, and their outcomes have led to what looks like a marketised higher education system. The impact of reductions in the funding of public higher education has meant that the responsibility of paying for higher education has shifted to families and students, sometimes referred to as cost sharing. This has led to instruments such as student loans and the introduction of market mechanisms. It's fair to say that most national higher education systems are operating a hybrid funding model with trends that are seeing reductions in government subsidies, increases in student fees, and other forms of income generation. Students are paying fees through government-backed loans and other forms of debt, along with reliance on family or through working while studying. Universities themselves are increasingly involved in activities that involve market-making mechanisms for outcomes that include business efficiency and income generation. Ball and Udell talk about endogenous and exogenous privatisation, and this is a helpful distinction that sheds light on some of these activities. Endogenous privatisation is where the language, norms and processes of business or corporate culture is brought into the public university. We can see this where institutions are changing the way they work, using practices taken from corporate cultures, and we can see how the language of business is pervading higher education institutions. Considering students as consumers of a product of higher education is an example where a business norm is being used to describe the relationship between students and universities. Exogenous privatisation is where public education services are opened up to private sector participation on a for-profit basis, or where the private sector is invited to deliver some parts of public education. And this, exogenous privatisation, can be seen in the relationships and partnerships that are forming between a range of private companies and providers and universities. As a result of these developments, entire new industries, services and structures have been developed into what constitutes a new ecosystem of what a higher education system looks like globally and in regional and national contexts. And this new ecosystem, which is being constituted and reconstituted, is increasingly enabled by digital technologies, centres higher education as a market opportunity for players other than public universities to compete to provide whole or parts of education. The ecosystem is being shaped by universities themselves, private companies, policymakers, and organisations such as the World Bank and similar intergovernmental organisations. So where does unbundling come into this? If considering the ways in which higher education can be considered a market, unbundling is a useful way of describing a process through which universities and private sector companies are engaging with each other to evolve models of teaching and learning provision.